Hi, everyone. I'm Kara Golden, and we are here for our next segment of Author Talks Live. And we are streaming live right now to LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Audience members, please send in comments and questions, and we'll be featuring those later in the episode. We're here for 20 minutes. Everyone can afford 20 minutes. And we're really excited for this next guest who is a very, very special person. And I met Dr. Robert Lustig years ago when actually some friends had taken their kids to go and see Dr. Lustig, who is now a professor emeritus at of Pediatrics Division of Endocrinology at the University of California, San Francisco. He is also the author of several books on food and nutrition, including the most recent published book in early May, which I have right here, which is so worth the read, called Metabolical: The Lure and the Lies of Processed Food, Nutrition, and Modern Medicine. This is somebody who has done so much research and seen so many cases that he can really speak to so much of what I really believe as well. But it's anyway, it's very, very exciting to have you here, Dr. Lustig.
Thanks very much, Kara. You know, that's a very kind introduction. I don't know that I deserve it, but you know, whatever.
You absolutely do. And you know, I'll just jump right in. You said that in the book, which, as I said, is just absolutely awesome. I mean, it's the next level. I think, as you said before we went live, it's you know, tell all a little bit, sort of what you know and what you've seen. So it's very, very exciting to see this. Not that your other books were bad by any stretch, but I mean, this one was absolutely great and written in a way that, you know, you don't have to be a doctor to actually understand it too. So, so you've said that big food and big bev have hacked our bodies and minds to pursue pleasure instead of happiness, and that has fostered today's epidemic of addiction and depression. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that.
Well, it's a complicated science, to be sure. The science is half the book, and the other half of the book is really an expose on the politics. You know, if this was a Hollywood book, that, you know, we'd call it a kiss and tell. But really, because it's about diabetes, it's more like a piss and tell. But the bottom line is that the big food, big pharma, and big government have been, I won't say conspiring, because conspiracy suggests collusion between the various industry and governmental actors, and it's not clear that they've been in collusion, but they have all basically been working for their own purposes, and in the process, we have gotten sicker because they have pushed processed food on us. The change in our food supply over the last 50 years has basically resulted in a devolution in our health, as demonstrated by our lifespan now going down 4 years in a row, a devolution in our health care, as demonstrated by the fact that Social Security and Medicare will both be broke by the year 2029. And finally, a devolution in our environment, as demonstrated by the fact that we now have 10 years before the planet immolates permanently and irreversibly. And all of these, when you go right down to the root cause, can be explained by the change in our food supply and in our food system, starting about 50 years ago with the advent of processed food. So what I do in the book is I weave together these various strands. The Lancet called this not a set of epidemics, but rather a syndemic of various epidemics. And when that happens, that's a systems biology issue. And so you have to understand what the root cause is. And I explain how it all works, how it happened, and why it's killing us.
So interesting. I remember 16 years ago when we started Hint, we put this email and phone number on the bottle, and we had customers from day one reaching out to us. We were in Whole Foods in San Francisco was the first store, and people were picking up the bottle. It was the first time I'd ever heard about this disease called type 2 diabetes. And can you talk a little bit about type 2 diabetes? I know you've seen many people over the years with this.
Well, so type 2 diabetes used to be a disease of aging. When I entered medical school in 1976, 2.5% of people over age 65 had type 2 diabetes. And I was particularly interested in it because my grandfather was one of them. All right. But now it's 9.4% of the entire US population. And that's all ages. And 1 out of every 3 children diagnosed with diabetes today is type 2. This is a disease that never occurred to children. And now children get 2 diseases that they never got before, type 2 diabetes and fatty liver disease. Now, prior to 1980, those 2 diseases were either the diseases of aging or the diseases of alcohol. But kids are young and kids don't drink alcohol. But boy, oh boy, do they consume sugar. And it turns out that sugar and alcohol are metabolized virtually identically in the liver. And so that is what's causing the fatty liver disease and the type 2 diabetes. The addition of sugar for palatability, the removal of fiber for shelf life, that is the hallmark of processed food. And that is what's changed our bodies. That's what's changed our brains. That's what's addicted us. That's what's depressed us. And that is what's causing all of these chronic diseases, type 2, hypertension, dyslipidemia, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. These are all diseases of mitochondria. And what we've learned is that sugar poisons mitochondria. So processed food, because it is high in sugar, low in fiber, ultimately floods the liver, starves the gut. It is basically, in no uncertain terms, a poison.
And what do you think about these diet sweeteners that are out? I obviously am not a fan and gave up my diet soda. What have you seen on some of these people who have type 2 diabetes?
Right. So
and diet sweeteners.
So for years, I would say we don't know, but actually now we do know. There was a paper that came out in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition not too long ago, I think it was 2018, that basically said the toxicity of 1 Coca-Cola equals the toxicity of 2 Diet Coca-Colas. So half as bad. Not good, but half as bad. And people say, well, how can that be? No sugar, no calories. And the answer is it's still insulin. Insulin is the bad guy in this story. Insulin drives energy into fat cells. More insulin, more fat. And insulin also makes your coronary arteries grow, increasing your risk for heart disease. And it also increases your risk for cancer because it makes your breast cells grow. And it also causes changes in your brain, leading ultimately to dementia. So the goal of this exercise is to get the insulin down. And it turns out diet sweeteners don't get the insulin down. And for that reason, they are not as bad, but they're still bad.
Yeah, I mean, I'm convinced. I was never diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, but I think I was what is termed pre-type 2 diabetic. I was pretty darn close, had a lot of the signs, and I caught it. So type 2 diabetes is reversible, correct?
It is. And the thing is that the American Diabetes Association won't tell you that. They tell you it's a chronic degenerative disease that's going to require continuous medication, for the rest of your life. And the fact of the matter is, at least if you catch it within the first 7 years after diagnosis, it is eminently reversible, but you have to do something different. Einstein's theory of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. If you don't do anything different, don't expect a different result. The fact of the matter is that type 2 diabetes almost assuredly is due to liver pathology, due to liver fat. And because of that liver fat, you develop body insulin resistance, and your pancreas ends up having to over secrete insulin to make the liver do its job. That burns out the beta cells, and now you have type 2 diabetes. But if you fix the liver by getting rid of the fat, which means getting rid of the sugar in your diet, you can actually reverse type 2 diabetes. And we did this in our clinic pretty consistently, on a daily basis.
So you don't forget, audience, to please send us in those questions as well. I'm very, very excited to answer some of these, have Dr. Lustig answer some of these questions. But you say, Dr. Lustig, that the real disease that most people face is something doctors aren't even screening for. What should people be asking for?
Well, so the point of the book is that currently these diseases that I just mentioned, they all have ICD-11 codes. Doctors know how to, quote, treat them, but in fact, they're not treating them. They're treating the symptoms. The high LDL, that's not the disease, that's the symptom. The high blood glucose, that's not the disease, that's the symptom. The high blood pressure, that's not the disease, that's the symptom. What's going on underneath, inside the cells, is the real pathology. And I list them in the book, and I'm just going to run them real quick because we don't have time.
Yeah, it's so good, everyone. He's got so many notes in here too. But go ahead, Dr. Lustig.
All right, here they are: glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, membrane instability, inflammation, methylation, and autophagy. None of these have ICD-11 codes. None of them are ever mentioned by any doctors because you can't bill for them. And doctors don't know how to treat them, so you never find out about them. Ultimately, none of these are druggable. They're all foodable. Because they're all mitochondrial problems. And drugs don't get to the mitochondria, but food does. And so you can fix your mitochondria by fixing your diet. And the simplest way to fix it is get rid of anything that has a food label, because real food doesn't have a label.
So interesting. So how do we get real food to people, especially ones that maybe can't afford it? I mean, obviously we talk about these, food deserts, and what's your thought on that?
So this is the biggest bugaboo is, you can know all of this, and what are you going to do about it? How do you implement this? So there are several things. Number one, individuals have to understand the difference between processed food and real food. If they think Cheetos is food, all is lost. I mean, it's just that simple. On the other hand, if you don't have access to food at your, store, because convenience stores only stock processed food because of depreciation and shelf life. Because real food goes rancid, because real food can be attacked by bacteria. Well, our mitochondria are just like bacteria. And so processed food, it can't be metabolized by the bacteria. Well, it also turns out they can't be metabolized by our mitochondria either. And so the excess lines our arteries and our livers and causes disease. So education is job one. However, education alone won't solve this problem. And education has never solved any substance of abuse. And sugar is a substance of abuse. So what has to happen? Well, we have to basically make real food affordable. And how do you do that? Well, let's start by getting rid of the food subsidies, because the only things we subsidize are commodities. Storable food, corn, wheat, soy, sugar, the things that are actually killing us. Now, this has to be done at a governmental level. The point is that the government has to understand that the food subsidies are actually costing them money, because they end up paying 62% of all health insurance in this country. So they are on the hook for $1.9 trillion. The Farm Bill only allocates money for $392 billion. That difference, that shortfall, is all being paid by the federal government, and that's coming out of every taxpayer's paycheck. So this doesn't work for big government. The problem is they don't understand the two are related. And so educating the government is the other reason that I wrote the book. All stakeholders have to understand how they can benefit. And right now, the food industry doesn't understand it, and federal government doesn't understand it.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that the other thing that so many of these companies get away with is the fact that it's it's a slow disease, right? So it's not like
Right.
dropping poison immediately and arsenic or something and dying, right? Like it's a slow disease that people are getting, and that way they can avoid the blame
Right. I've
ultimately for
heard
it.
it referred to as a car crash in slow motion. You are
Yeah.
powerless to do anything about it. But in fact, you have agency. You can do something about it. And in the book, I describe all of the things you can do. First of all, you can know. Okay. And your doctor doesn't know, but you can know. And I have an entire chapter on how to diagnose yourself, knowing your lab tests. Never take normal for an answer from your doctor. Get the numbers. Okay. And show your doctor how to do it, because they don't know how. And I know, because I'm the one who has to teach it in medical school. So the bottom line is, you are not, you have agency. You have the ability to undo the damage that's been done, but you have to know how. You have to have a roadmap out of it. And that's what this book is. You have to know how you drove into the ditch in order to be able to extricate yourself out of it. And that's what this book does. It explains how we as individuals and how we as a society drove into this ditch of metabolic dysfunction and climate immolation, and how we can back ourselves out of it.
It's so confusing for people. I think it's going to the grocery store today, there's so many choices, and as I say, it's healthy perception versus healthy reality in most cases. What do you suggest? I mean, what is your number one piece of advice for people who really do want to live a healthy lifestyle?
So I would take issue, Kara. I don't think there are many choices. I think, in fact, there
Well,
are
not
very
good
few
ones.
choices. There are a lot of labels, but
Yeah.
there are very few choices, because virtually everything with a label has been spiked with added sugar. You try to find a food with a label, with a logo that doesn't have sugar added to it for some reason. All right. And the real reason it's been added is because they know when they add it, you buy more, because it's addictive. So in fact, there are actually very few choices. And, we're sort of forced to eat all this processed food. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The food industry makes 3,900 calories per person per day. We can only eat 1,800 calories per person per day. Who eats the other half, the other 1,900? The answer is we do, because it turns out sugar, because it blocks mitochondrial function, and because insulin resistance blocks leptin signaling in the brain, the food industry has figured out a way to skirt our physiology and get us to actually eat more so they can make more money. So, in fact, the way to deal with this problem is to actually eschew the choice, quote unquote choice, that the food industry has given you in the supermarket, and rather eat real food. The problem, of course, is that real food's not available everywhere, and we have to fix that. And we could do it by changing the food subsidies.
Absolutely. So one of the questions, so many questions actually have come in, but for people that hate exercise, what do you recommend in order to live this healthy life?
So, first thing you have to understand is exercise is wonderful. Exercise is terrific. I am totally for exercise. However, of those 8 pathologies I mentioned before, only 4 of them are amenable to exercise. In other words, you cannot outrun a bad diet. So if you don't want to exercise, fix your diet, and then you wouldn't have to exercise. How about that?
So true. Here's another one. What's the number one thing you can do to change your diet?
Get rid of the sugar, the added sugar. And the problem is that it's everywhere. It's in everything. Unfortunately, you have to look at the label. And right, I wish you didn't have to look at the label. Today you do. And if any form of sugar, and there are 262 names for sugar, okay, and they're on my website. If any form of sugar is one of the first 3 ingredients, that's dessert. And you have to treat it as such.
Absolutely. So, and hint, by the way, does not have the added sweeteners in it. That
No, it
doesn't have
doesn't.
any sweeteners in it. So,
Exactly.
one last question I think we have time for. So, I always hear about inflammation,
Yeah.
and what would you say about that problem that we always hear about?
Absolutely. Inflammation is one of the 6 pathologies I mentioned at the outset. The question is, where's the inflammation come from? And the answer is, it comes from the gut. It's
Mhm.
gut inflammation, and the gut is really supposed to be outside your body. It's supposed to present a barrier so that the intestinal contents don't make it into your systemic circulation. So the cells in your intestine actually join together through what is known as tight junctions. The problem is that processed food destroys those tight junctions, leads to a phenomenon called leaky gut, and lipopolysaccharides, cytokines, even whole bacteria can make it their way from the intestinal lumen into your bloodstream. Then those go to your liver, set up liver inflammation, driving insulin resistance, and now you've got chronic metabolic disease. So inflammation is basically part and parcel of this entire metabolic syndrome. The question is, where does it come from? It comes from the gut.
So interesting. Well, Dr. Lustig, thank you so much. This book is gold. I mean, truly, I absolutely loved it. It is a pretty big one, but to be honest
It
with
is.
you, it didn't take me as long to get through as I thought. It's not as daunting as maybe I thought. It's a very quick and interesting read, and everybody should really go and pick it up. And
Well,
Dr. Lustig, thank you so much. And hopefully you'll come back and talk to us more. You and I speak the same
indeed.
language, and I
Yes, you.
absolutely love learning from you for sure.
All right.
So thanks
Thank
everyone for listening.